The Kairos was not a warship. That was the first thing anyone who saw her would notice. She was wide in the middle, flat along the belly, with cargo bays bolted onto her sides like saddlebags on a tired horse. Her hull had been patched in 17 places. Her engine nacelles were mismatched, one salvaged from a decommissioned scout vessel, one original, both old. She smelled, inside, of recycled air and burned coffee, and the particular kind of metal sweet that comes from a crew living close together in deep space for weeks. At a time, she had 4 laser cannons. 2 were operational at full capacity. 1 fired at about 60% on a good day. The 4th had been locked in a diagnostic loop for 3 months and nobody had fixed it yet. She carried 47 people. Commander Yara Ose had commanded the Kairos for 4 years. She knew every creak of the hull, every hesitation in the engine cycle, every blind spot in the sensor array. She knew which crew members slept badly and which ones snored. She knew that Chief Engineer Daco Menza ate his stress and had been going through the protein rations at twice the normal rate since they left Meridian Station. She knew that her youngest crew member, a 22-year-old nav operator named Priya Shen, still kept a photograph of her dog tucked under her console. The Kepler corridor was a long, relatively empty stretch of space between the human outer colonies and the neutral trade zones. It was used by supply runners, mail ships, science transports, and occasionally by the small patrol vessels that the Earth Space Service deployed to show presence in the outer sectors. It was not glamorous. Nothing ever happened out there. That was what everyone said. Osi was in the command chair reviewing supply manifests when the proximity alert fired. Not a soft ping, not a low priority flag. The full alarm. The one that meant something large had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel very close to them. Then 3 more alarms, all at once. 3 contacts, said Lieutenant Ferris from the sensor station. His voice was flat and practiced, but his hands were already moving fast across his board. Large, very large. Dropping out of FTL approximately 400 kilometers off the port bow, OC set the manifest down. Configuration? Ferris was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds that felt longer than they should have. Both warships, Commander. Destroyer class. All 3. The bridge went quiet the way a room goes quiet when everyone stops breathing at the same time. The Voth were not unknown to humanity. They had been in contact with human explorers and traders for decades. They were an old species, amphibian in origin, reptilian in evolution, cold-blooded in biology and, by most accounts, in temperament. They controlled a significant portion of the outer sectors. They did not trade with humans much, did not communicate more than necessary, and had made it quietly but clearly understood that the Kepler corridor was space they considered adjacent to their territory. Adjacent. Not theirs. Adjacent. The legal distinction had been argued about in diplomatic channels for years. 3 Voth destroyers appearing 400 kilometers off the port bow of a human supply ship was not a diplomatic argument. "They're hailing us," said the comms officer, a woman named Adeyeze, young, calm, already recording. "Open it," Osi said. The voice that came through was processed through a translation matrix, which stripped most of the tonal quality out of it, and left something flat and cold. The Voth commander spoke in the clipped formal register that their military used for official communications. There was no warmth in it. There was not meant to be. "Human vessel, you are operating in restricted space. You will cut your engines, power down your weapon systems, and prepare to be boarded. Compliance will be rewarded with the safety of your crew. Resistance will not." That was it. No preamble. No explanation of what authority defined this space as restricted. No indication that this was anything other than a formality to be processed and completed. Osi looked at the sensor display. 3 destroyers. Each one outmassed the Kairos by a factor of roughly 12. Each one was armed with weapons arrays that could reduce the Kairos to a debris field in under a minute if they chose. Ferris turned in his chair and looked at her. Menza's voice came over the internal comm from engineering. "Commander, I'm looking at what's out there." "I know," she said. "What are we doing?" She thought about the 47 people on this ship. She thought about Priya Shen's photograph. She thought about Menza and his protein rations and his stress. She thought about the 11 people currently in the cargo bays doing inventory, who didn't even know yet. She thought about what happened to crews that surrendered to Voth boarding parties. There were stories. They were not good stories. "Ferris," she said, "time to weapons lock on us from their current position?" "They're already locked, Commander." "Of course they were. A daze. Tell them we need 60 seconds to power down safely." Engine protocol requires gradual reduction or we risk a core overload. Adaze looked at her. Osi nodded once. Adaze opened the channel and delivered the message, her voice steady and professional. The Voth commander gave them 60 seconds. Osi used 40 of them. Mensa, I need everything you have to the forward thrusters. Everything. Strip it from life support in the secondary bays. Strip it from the cargo stabilizers. Strip it from whatever you need to strip it from. A pause from engineering. Then, Commander, that's going to push us to. I know what it's going to do. Do it. She turned to the helm. Chen, when I give the word, full burn directly toward the lead ship. Ramming trajectory. Don't flinch. Helm operator Chen, 28 years old and from Chengdu and usually the quietest person on the bridge, looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Yes, Commander. She hit the internal comm for the whole ship. All hands, brace positions now. Do not ask questions, brace. The 60 seconds ran out. The Voth fired. The first strike hit Kairos along the port side and tore through 2 cargo bays like paper. The hull screamed. Alarms went from loud to deafening. The lights dropped to emergency red. Osi felt the ship lurch under her and grabbed the arm of her chair and hold on. Full burn, she said now. The Kairos lurched forward. Everything that Mensa had pulled from the non-essential systems went into the forward thrusters, and the ship moved in a way that a wide, flat-bellied cargo vessel was absolutely not designed to move. She shook. She groaned. Something in the port nacelle made a sound that nacelles were not supposed to make. The Voth fired again. The second strike took out the rear sensor cluster and blew out a section of the upper hull. More alarms. Someone on the bridge was shouting damage reports. Osi heard them and did not respond because there was nothing to respond to yet. 400 kilometers closed faster than it had any right to. The Voth lead ship began to move, to turn, to bring its own thrusters into play, to get out of the way of this battered, shaking supply vessel that was apparently trying to physically collide with it. They were not fast enough. The Kairos hit the Voth destroyer at a slight angle, which was actually better than a direct hit would have been. It dragged the bow of the human ship along the Voth vessel's midsection, tearing through hull plating and what sensor arrays could catch, looked like it opened a major power conduit. Kairos itself took the impact in the forward section. The forward cargo bay was gone. The bow crumpled, but the ship held. The Voth destroyer did not. The power conduit breach cascaded. It took 11 seconds. Then the destroyer broke in half, and then it was a cloud of metal and gas and debris expanding slowly in all directions. Kairos was already inside that cloud. Osi's hands were bleeding. She had gripped the chair arm through the impact and the metal edge had cut her palms. She didn't notice until later. Mensa, talk to me. Mensa's voice came back rough and shaken. We're alive. Hull breaches in forward section and the 2 port bays. Emergency seals are holding. Engines are. Commander, we are on fumes. We have about 30% thrust capability. Weapons 1 cannon, the good one. Ferris, where are the other 2 ships? Ferris was pulling himself back into his seat. Blood on his forehead from hitting his console during the impact. They've broken off. They're at approximately 800 kilometers. Commander, they're not firing. She looked at the sensor display. The 2 remaining Voth destroyers were sitting still. Just sitting. She understood it, on some level. They had fired twice at a supply ship. The supply ship had rammed one of their destroyers and destroyed it and then hidden in the debris. This was not something that had a protocol. This was not something their tactical training had covered. There was a moment. She could feel it even across the distance, even through the silence on the comm channels, of pure paralysis. She used it. Ferris, use the debris field. Everything that's big enough to give us cover. I need positions. Already on it. Mensa, I need those engines. Whatever you have, working. Adaze, get me a channel to the nearest ESS patrol station. Tell them our position, our status, and tell them we need a rescue window in the next 4 hours or we won't need rescuing anymore. Adaze opened channels. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was not. For the next 3 hours and 40 minutes, Kairos moved through the debris of the ship she had destroyed, slowly, carefully, using the wreckage as cover, while Mensa and his team worked in vacuum suits on the exterior hull, patching what they could, rerouting what they couldn't patch. The 2 Voth destroyers stayed at distance. Twice they moved to intercept positions. Twice, Kairos shifted deeper into the debris cloud. The Voth fired once more, a ranging shot, probing. It hit a piece of the destroyed destroyer instead of the Kairos. Then they stopped. Osi did not understand at the time what was happening on the other side of that silence. She did not know that the Voth commanders were in urgent communication with their high command. She did not know the words being used to describe what a cargo ship had just done. She did not know that the words had no equivalent in the Voth tactical lexicon, because the situation they described had never needed a word before. She was thinking about other things. The ESS patrol cutter, Ardent, arrived in 3 hours and 51 minutes. It was fast and it was armed, and when it dropped out of FTL, the 2 Voth destroyers left without a word. The Ardent's captain, a man named Reyes, came aboard the Kairos himself. He walked through the ship. He saw the damage. He saw the crew, some sitting, some working, all of them wearing the particular expression of people who have been through something and have not yet decided how to feel about it. He found Osi in the cargo hold, sitting on a crate with a list on her tablet. "Commander," he said, "are you all right?" She looked up. Her hands were bandaged now. Her face was tired in a deep way that sleep wouldn't touch for a while. 11, she said. He waited. 11 dead. I need you to make sure their families are notified before this goes anywhere official, before any report, before any briefing. The families first. She looked back at the tablet. 11 names. I want someone to say their names. Reyes looked at the list. He nodded. I'll handle it personally, he said. She nodded once. Then she went back to looking at the names. Kairos was towed home. It took 9 days. Along the way, Reyes filed his initial report. It was factual. It contained no editorializing. It stated what had happened in the Kepler corridor in plain language, with sensor data attached. The report moved up through channels the way reports did, desk to desk, rank to rank, each reader passing it along with the particular speed of someone who wanted someone else to be responsible for what came next. By the time Kairos crossed into home space, the report had reached the Earth Space Service's Senior Command, the UN Security Council's Military Committee, and 3 separate intelligence desks that were not officially supposed to share information with each other. Everyone read it. Nobody quite knew what to say, not because the Kairos had survived, but because of how a damaged cargo ship had rammed a warship, used the wreckage as cover, held position for nearly 4 hours under threat of 2 more warships, refused at every point to stop. There was a word in the human military tradition for this. It was an old word. It came from a very old kind of warfare. The word was attrition. The idea was simple and it was brutal. You do not fight to win. You fight until the other side cannot continue. You accept your losses and you keep moving, and you make the cost of fighting you so high that the enemy eventually has to make a calculation. Is this worth it? Is this worth the price? Humans had built entire wars around that idea, entire centuries of it. Other species had their own versions of war, grand fleet engagements, decisive strikes, the clean logic of overwhelming force applied at the right moment in the right place to produce a clear result. None of them had attrition. None of them had developed, over thousands of years of fighting each other in mud and snow and vacuum, the particular human habit of deciding that losing was only the end if you stopped. In a medical bay on the Kairos, Commander Yara Ose sat with her tablet and her list of 11 names. She did not feel like a symbol. She felt tired and sad, and angry in the way that lives under sadness, when the sadness is about something that should not have happened. She read the names. She would read them again tomorrow, and the day after. She was still reading them when the first official communique from the Voth High Command arrived at the UN diplomatic office on Earth. It was not an apology. The report was supposed to be classified. Most things that were supposed to be classified in the outer sectors were not, in practice, classified at all. Space was large and lonely, and the people who moved through it, traders, pilots, diplomats, intelligence gatherers, drifters who called themselves independent contractors, had a long tradition of sharing information, because information was currency, and currency kept you alive. The Voth filed their official incident report 4 days after the ambush. It was a military document, formatted in the Voth High Command style, which meant it was dense and precise, and stripped of anything that might read as emotional. It described the engagement in the Kepler corridor with clinical accuracy, the number of vessels involved, the exchange of fire, the loss of the destroyer, Kesfaran, the withdrawal of the remaining 2 ships. It did not say why the remaining 2 ships had withdrawn. That absence was, in its own way, louder than anything the report actually said. The Draenei intercepted it first. The Draenei were traders by nature and by evolution, a small, quick-moving insectoid species with 6 limbs, excellent multitasking capability, and a cultural compulsion toward information gathering that their philosophers called wisdom, and everyone else called nosiness. They had listening posts near every major transit corridor in the outer sectors, which was technically illegal, under several accords, and which nobody enforced because the Draenei's trade networks were too useful to everyone. Coordinator Siv Tan read the intercept in his station office on Draenei Hub 7, which was an unremarkable metal structure orbiting an unremarkable moon, and which was therefore exactly the kind of place where remarkable things got processed quietly. He read it twice. Then he called his deputy in and told her to pull everything the Draenei Information Network had on human military engagements in the last 40 years. She came back 2 hours later with a data packet and a look on her face that Siv Tan recognized. It was the look she got when something was interesting in a way that was also uncomfortable. The data packet was thinner than either of them expected. Humans had been in space for just over 200 years in any meaningful capacity. They had fought several wars among themselves during that time, the kind of messy, grinding, long-duration conflicts that seemed to characterize their species regardless of the theater. They had fought 3 minor engagements with non-human species. All 3 had ended in human victory. The pattern in all of it, once you knew to look for it, was the same. Humans did not win quickly. Humans did not win cleanly. Humans did not, in the traditional military sense, win decisively, not in the opening stages. They absorbed damage, they took losses, they kept coming, and at some point, somewhere in the middle of the conflict, the math stopped working for the other side and started working only for the humans, and by then it was usually too late to recalculate. Siv Tan's deputy said, "Should we be concerned?" Siv Tan thought about the Draenei trade agreements that ran through the Kepler corridor. He thought about the fact that they currently had 3 commercial contracts with Voth-adjacent companies. He thought about the Kesferon, which had been a destroyer reduced to debris by a supply ship. Yes, he said, quietly. He canceled 2 of the 3 Voth contracts before the end of the day. The third he restructured to remove any dependency on Kepler corridor transit. He did it through intermediaries. He made sure there was no official Draenei government fingerprint on any of it. When the Voth trade liaison called 3 days later asking about the contract restructuring, Siv Tan blamed regulatory updates and spoke for 40 minutes about tariff schedules until the liaison gave up. The Sul received the report later, and, differently, the Sul were not a species given to urgency. They lived in the upper atmospheric layers of gas giants, enormous floating creatures that communicated through pressure waves and had a perception of time so different from most species that their diplomatic communications often referenced events that had happened decades ago as if they were current news. They had achieved spaceflight through a long, patient process of engineering that had taken them approximately 800 years, longer than most species, and they regarded this as entirely reasonable. They had, however, very good archives. When the Sul Academic Collective, the closest thing they had to a military intelligence body, processed the Kepler corridor incident, they did not consult tactical databases. They consulted historical ones. The Sul had been cataloging other species for a very long time. They had records of human history that humans themselves had partially lost, gathered from intercepted transmissions and long-range observation, and the occasional direct contact. They had records going back to humanity's first radio transmissions. That strange initial burst of electromagnetic noise that had announced the species to the wider galaxy before the species even knew the galaxy was listening. One of the Sul archivists, a collective member who had been studying humans specifically for 60 years, which was not considered an unusual specialization among the Sul, surfaced a word. The word was attrition. The archivist explained it to the collective, not the dictionary definition, but the practical one, the way it had worked in human history, the wars it had shaped, the outcomes it had produced. The archivist explained that humans had fought wars lasting years, decades, in some cases generations, without stopping. That human military history was full of engagements that other species would have categorized as defeats, being reclassified by the humans who survived them as temporary setbacks. The collective was quiet for a long time after that. Sul quiet was different from other species' quiet. It had texture to it, weight. Then one of the elder members said, "They have no concept of an acceptable loss threshold." The archivist said, "They have the concept. They simply set it higher than any other species we have cataloged." Another silence. How high? The archivist took a moment. "Our models suggest that the threshold, in the context of a sufficiently motivated human population engaged in a conflict they perceive as Existential or as a matter of justice, approach is total. Nobody said anything after that for a while. The Maroc Confederacy got the report through official channels, because the Maroc had official channels into everything. They were the dominant military power in the galaxy's mapped regions. Not the largest species, not the oldest, but the most organized. They had built their dominance through exactly the kind of decisive, clean, overwhelming force warfare that the galaxy understood and respected. They had not lost a significant conflict in 300 years. They ran the numbers on the Kepler corridor incident the same day the report arrived. General Sorvan, a Marak, which meant tall, gray-skinned, with eyes that were very dark and very still, sat in the simulation center of the Confederacy's military headquarters and watched the tactical reconstruction play out on the display in front of him. He watched it 4 times. The cargo ship, the ramming, the debris field, the 3 hours and 51 minutes of holding position with 2 destroyers at range. His tactical staff had run 40 simulations of the engagement, varying the parameters. In every simulation where the human vessel behaved according to standard non-human tactical models, assessing threat, calculating survival odds, making rational decisions based on available options, Kairos was destroyed or captured in under 12 minutes. The simulations where the human vessel behaved the way it had actually behaved produced different results, not always survival, but always in every single run. Significant cost to the attacking force. His chief analyst, a young Maroc named Ressa, stood beside him and said, "The problem isn't the tactics, sir. The tactics are improvised. The problem is the decision framework." Sorvan looked at her. "Other species," Ressa said, "when facing overwhelming force, run a calculation. Resources available versus threat level versus probability of survival. When the calculation returns a negative result, the logical action is surrender or withdrawal. The calculation takes fractions of a second. It happens automatically. And humans?" Ressa pulled up a display. Human military history. It was a long display. Humans run the calculation too. But the variable they weight differently is the survival probability threshold. For most species, when survival probability drops below approximately 30%, withdrawal or surrender is the automatic response. It's evolutionary. A species that fights to the death against impossible odds doesn't survive long enough to become a spacefaring civilization. Sorvan said, "But humans did. Humans did. Our best analysis suggests their survival probability threshold, the point at which they stop fighting, is situation dependent. In conflicts they perceive as defensive, or as matters of what they call honor or justice, the threshold drops dramatically. In some documented cases," she hesitated, "in some documented cases it appears to approach 0. Sorvan looked at the display, at the long list of human conflicts, at the ones that had lasted decades, at the casualty figures that would have ended any other species' war effort in the first year. "They don't stop," he said. "Not a question. They stop when they win," Ressa said, "or when there is genuinely nothing left to fight with, and even then." She pulled up one more file, an old one. A human engagement from early in their spaceflight history, against a pirate collective that had been larger, better armed, and better positioned. The human force had lost 60% of its ships in the first engagement. They had come back with the remaining 40% and won. "Even then," Ressa said, "they tend to find something." Sorvan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What does the Voth communicate to human diplomatic channels say?" His aide, standing by the door, said, "Demands, sir. Session of the Kepler corridor. Formal acknowledgement of Voth territorial claims, and reparations for the loss of the case Varan." Sorvan looked at the aide for a moment, then he looked back at the display. "Reparations," he said, "for the ship they lost in the ambush they initiated." "Yes, sir." A long silence. "Draft a preliminary communication to the Human Diplomatic Office," Sorvan said. "Unofficial, back channel. Acknowledge the incident. Nothing else yet, just open the line." Ressa looked at him. "You think this is going to escalate?" "I think," Sorvan said carefully, "that the Voth have made an error in calculation. And I think the nature of the error is that they calculated against a species they did not understand. And I would very much prefer to not be standing next to them when the bill comes due." He looked at the reconstruction one more time. The Kairos. Broken and slow, moving through the debris of the ship it had destroyed. 2 warships at range, not firing. He thought about what it must have looked like from inside those destroyers. This battered, impossible thing, still moving, still refusing. He thought about the word Ressa had found in the human military archive, attrition. He thought about what it meant to be on the receiving end of a species that had built a whole philosophy of warfare around the idea of refusing to stop. In a small trading post on the edge of the neutral zone, a Drenai pilot named Honrek was having a drink with a Marak cargo inspector and a human freighter captain named Oloy, who had been running the Kepler routes for 20 years. The Drenai pilot had heard about the Kairos. The Marak inspector had heard about the Kairos. The human captain had not heard about the Kairos, because the official report was still technically classified and nobody had told him yet. They told him. He listened to the whole thing without speaking. The ambush, the ramming, the debris field, the 3 hours and 51 minutes, the 2 Voth destroyers that had just sat there, not knowing what to do. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, that sounds about right." The Drenai pilot stared at him. "That sounds about right." The human captain shrugged. He finished his drink. "You mess with a human ship, you get a human response. Osie's a good commander. Her crew trusted her. That's what that is." He set his glass down. "What did the Voth send to our diplomatic office?" The Marak inspector told him about the communique, the demands, the reparations. The human captain was quiet again for a moment. The Drenai pilot, who had been around humans long enough to read their silences a little, felt something move across the back of his carapace. It was a feeling he associated with noticing that something large and dangerous was in the room, and he had only just looked up. The human captain said. His voice was calm. Not angry, not loud, just certain. The way you were certain about things that were simply true. He paid for his drink and left. The Drenai pilot and the Marak inspector sat in silence for a moment. Then the Marak inspector said, "How long do you think before this becomes a war?" The Drenai pilot thought about the cancelled contracts, about the archived word he had found in the Sewell reports that had started circulating quietly through the information networks, about 40 years of human military history. "It already is," he said. "The humans just haven't said it out loud yet." He finished his drink. Outside the trading post, the Kepler corridor sat quiet in the dark between stars. The debris of the Kesvaran was still drifting through it, slow and cold, spreading further apart with every hour. And somewhere, in the neural networks of 40 different intelligence services on 20 different worlds, the data was being processed and filed and forwarded and discussed. The incident, the numbers, the word. Nobody was saying it out loud yet, but they were all thinking it. The galaxy had poked something it did not fully understand, and the something was waking up. The UN War Council chamber was not an impressive room. People who visited it for the first time were usually surprised by that. They expected something grand, high ceilings, dramatic lighting, the kind of architecture that announced to anyone walking in that important things happened here. What they got instead was a medium-sized room with a long rectangular table, chairs that had been reupholstered twice in the last decade, a wall display that occasionally flickered in the bottom left corner, and a smell of old coffee that had seeped so deeply into the walls over the years that no cleaning crew had ever fully removed it. 23 delegates sat around the table. Military advisors stood along the walls. Translators sat in the glass booth at the far end. The room was full, but it was not loud. It had the particular kind of quiet that comes when everyone in a space is thinking hard and choosing their words carefully. Delegate Roadami sat near the center of the table. She was the UN senior military liaison, which meant she was not quite a soldier and not quite a diplomat, but occupied the uncomfortable space between the two where most of the real decisions got made. She was 51 years old, originally from Lagos, with close-cut gray hair, and the kind of face that had been serious for so long it had settled into seriousness as a default state. She was not given to dramatic gestures or loud speeches. She was given to precision. She had the Voth communique on a tablet in front of her. She picked it up, she read it aloud. Her voice was even and unhurried. She read every word, including the formal headers and the official seals, and the bureaucratic language that surrounded the actual demands like padding around something sharp. She did not summarize. She did not editorialize. She read it exactly as it was written, and then she set the tablet back down on the table. The room was quiet. The communique demanded 3 things. First, formal human withdrawal from the Kepler corridor, with the corridor to be recognized as Voth-adjacent territory under Voth jurisdiction. Second, a formal apology from the Earth Space Service for the destruction of the Voth destroyer, Kesvaran, during what the communique described as an unprovoked escalation by the human vessel, ESS Kairos. Third, financial reparations to be calculated based on the assessed value of the Kesvaran, and its crew complement to be paid in full within 1 standard year. Those were the demands. The Voth had also included, at the end of the communique, a single paragraph that was not a demand but a statement. It said that the Voth High Command was prepared to consider the matter closed if the above conditions were met. It said that the Voth did not seek extended conflict with humanity. It said that a prompt and cooperative response would be viewed as an indication of humanity's willingness to exist peacefully within the established order of the outer sectors. Adeyemi had read that paragraph 4 times before the meeting. Each time, the phrase, established order, had sat in her chest like a stone. The delegate from Australia spoke first. He said, "They want us to apologize for defending ourselves." Nobody responded to that because it did not need a response. The delegate from Brazil said, "We should consider the strategic position. The Voth have significant military assets in the outer sectors. A formal conflict would be costly," said the military advisor standing behind Adeyemi's chair. His name was General Park, and he was the kind of man who had spent his entire career calculating costs. "Yes, it would be costly. I want that on the record before we go any further. A war with the Voth at this time, given our current deployment and asset positions in the outer sectors, would be costly." "How costly?" someone asked. Park said, "We would win. I want that on the record too." That was the second silence. It was different from the first one. The first one had been the silence of people processing outrage. This one was the silence of people processing certainty and deciding what to do with it. Adeyemi spoke. Kairos was a supply vessel on a documented route in unclaimed space, she said. It was ambushed by 3 Voth warships fired upon without warning, and its crew was given the choice of surrender or destruction. 11 of those crew members died. Commander Osi and 36 others survived because she made a decision that cost the Voth one of the ships that attacked her. The Voth's position is that we owe them an apology and money for that ship. She paused. I want to make sure everyone in this room is clear on what we are actually being asked to do. We are being asked to apologize for surviving. We are being asked to pay for the weapon that was used against us. And we are being asked to give up the transit corridor that our supply lines depend on, which would effectively cut our outer colonies off from resupply within 2 years. She looked around the table. I don't think we should do that, she said. The vote was not close. It took 40 minutes. There were 3 abstentions, which Adeyemi noted, and which she thought were about domestic political considerations rather than genuine uncertainty. The rest was unanimous. The response to the Voth communique was drafted in the next 2 hours. Adeyemi wrote most of it herself. It was short. It declined all 3 demands. It stated that the Kairos had acted in lawful self-defense in unclaimed space. It stated that humanity held the Voth High Command responsible for the deaths of 11 crew members. It stated that humanity expected a formal accounting for the ambush. It did not threaten. It did not bluster. It did not use the word war. It did not need to. What happened next did not look like what people expected war preparation to look like. There was no single moment of mobilization. No grand fleet assembling in orbit around Earth with banners and speeches. No dramatic broadcast to the citizens of humanity announcing that the time had come to defend the species. It was quieter than that. It was faster than that. The shipyards went to extended shifts the same week the vote was taken. Not emergency shifts, extended shifts. The kind that meant hiring more workers, adjusting supply chains, rerouting raw materials. It looked, from the outside, like an industrial expansion decision. It looked like paperwork. The mining operations in the asteroid belt near Jupiter got new contracts. Deep contracts, long-term, with clauses about delivery schedules that had never been in mining contracts before. The miners did not ask many questions. The pay was good. Civilian transport companies received communications from the ESS logistics office asking about the structural specifications of their vessels, asking which ones could be retrofitted, asking about crew rosters and whether any crew members had military background. Asking these questions in the polite, dry language of regulatory inquiry that did not sound like recruitment. It was recruitment. In the training facilities on Meridian Station and Fort Callaway, and the new campus outside Nairobi that had been announced as an agricultural research center 18 months ago and was not an agricultural research center, new training cohorts were forming. 3 weeks of basic, 6 weeks of technical specialization. Not long, long enough. Humans who had been miners became soldiers in 3 weeks. Humans who had been freighter mechanics became weapons technicians. Humans who had been doing inventory on cargo runs became crew members on ships that were, in the same 3 weeks, being quietly armed. It did not look like what people expected war preparation to look like. It looked like everyone just starting. doing the next thing, and the next thing after that. Adeyemi visited the Kairos. On the 14th day after the vote, the ship was at dock in the ESS facility above Earth. It was being repaired. The forward section was already largely rebuilt. The hull patches were being replaced with new plating. The mismatched engine nacelles were both being replaced with matched units, which had apparently never happened in the 4 years Osi had commanded the ship. Adeyemi found Osi in the medical bay. She was cleared for most activity now. The physical injuries from the engagement had been significant but not permanently damaging. She was sitting on the edge of a medical bed with her bandaged hands in her lap and a tablet on the bed beside her. Adeyemi had met Osi twice before, briefly, at ESS functions. She remembered a woman who was straightforward and not much for small talk, and had the particular quality of competence that didn't need to announce itself. She looked tired now, tired in the specific way of someone who had been sleeping fine but hadn't rested in 2 weeks. Commander, Adeyemi said. Osi looked up. Delegate Adeyemi sat down in the chair beside the bed. She did not bring an aide. She did not bring a recording device. I wanted to tell you directly, she said, before you hear it through official channels. The council voted. We're not meeting the Voth demands. Osi was quiet for a moment. What does that mean? It means what you think it means. We're mobilizing. It'll take time, months before we have meaningful force projection in the outer sectors. But it started. Osi looked at her hands. Could it have been stopped? Adeyemi considered the question honestly. It deserved an honest answer. Possibly, she said. If we had met the demands, given up the corridor, paid what they asked, apologized. She paused. But you and I both know what that would have meant for the next incident. And the one after that. Osi nodded slowly. They chose the answer, Adeyemi said. When they ambushed a supply ship and then sent us a bill for the trouble. They made the calculation for us. Osi looked up at her. Her eyes were steady. Not angry, or not only angry. There was something under the anger that Adeyemi recognized because she had seen it in the mirror lately, a kind of weight. The weight of knowing what was coming and having no way to make it lighter. 11 people, Osi said, I know. Make sure it matters, whatever happens next. Make sure their 11 names are in the official record, in the declaration, in whatever document starts this. Not a footnote, the reason held her gaze. They will be, she said. I'll write them in myself. The formal declaration went out 3 days later. It was 3 sentences long. The first sentence named the Kairos and named the 11 dead and stated what had happened in the Kepler corridor. The second sentence stated that the Voth High Command had refused to take responsibility and had instead issued demands that humanity rejected in full. The third sentence said that humanity considered itself in a state of armed conflict with the Voth hegemony as of the date of transmission and would prosecute that conflict until a just resolution was reached. 3 sentences, no rhetoric, no list of grievances going back decades, no dramatic language about the fate of the species. Just what happened, what was demanded, and what humanity's answer was. Adeyemi transmitted it herself from the UN Communications Office at 0300 hours, Earth Standard Time. She sat in the quiet of the office after it was done. The building was largely empty at that hour. The lights were low. The coffee she had brought in 3 hours ago was cold. She thought about Osi reading her list of names. She thought about the shipyards running double shifts, the miners signing contracts, the freighter mechanics learning weapons systems. All of it already moving, already in motion, the vast slow machinery of human mobilization turning over and beginning to grind. She thought about the Voth communique and the phrase, established order, and the assumption behind it. The assumption that humanity would calculate the cost and decide it was too high, that the rational response to overwhelming force was compliance, that the Kairos had been an anomaly rather than a sample. They had not understood what they were looking at. The Drenai ambassador received the declaration at 0400 hours and immediately locked his station. The Sul Collective received it and updated their historical archives with a new entry. The entry was not long, the date, the 3 sentences. A note that said, conflict initiated by non-human aggression, human response, predictable in type, underestimated in scale, see attrition doctrine of, see also, historical precedents 147. The Marak General Servan received it and called Ressa into his office. She read it. She set it down. 3 sentences, she said. 3 sentences. He agreed. She was quiet for a moment. The back-channel communication you sent to the human diplomatic office, have they responded? Not yet. They were busy. He looked at the declaration on his desk. They will. Through every diplomatic channel in the mapped sectors of space, The declaration moved, desk to desk, screen to screen, translation matrix to translation matrix, getting rendered into 17 languages, processed by 40 intelligence services, discussed in rooms that ranged from grand to unremarkable. The Voth High Command received it and called an emergency session. In the session, the admiral who had authorized the ambush said that humanity had made a grave miscalculation and would regret this response. The room did not disagree with him out loud, but several of the officers present, reading the declaration on their tablets, were thinking about a different miscalculation, about a supply ship that had rammed a warship, about 3 hours and 51 minutes in a debris field, about a species that had looked at 3 destroyers and a demand to surrender and had chosen, without hesitation, without significant deliberation, as if the answer were simply obvious, to one of those officers, a younger commander named Gren Vass, who had recently been assigned to the Kepler Corridor Command, thought about the phrase in the declaration. Until a just resolution was reached. Not until victory. Not until the enemy is defeated. Not until our terms are met. Until a just resolution. He did not know enough about humans to fully understand the distinction. He would learn. Commander Gren Vass had fought 11 engagements in his career. He had won all 11. This was not unusual for a Voth officer of his rank. The Voth military selected for competence rigorously and promoted slowly. And the commanders who reached his level had, by definition, demonstrated consistent results. Gren Vass was not a brilliant tactician. He was a thorough one, which in his experience was better. Brilliant tacticians made inspired decisions. Thorough tacticians made correct ones. He had been assigned to the Kepler Corridor Command 6 weeks after the Kairos incident. The assignment came with a briefing that was longer than most, and a set of orders that were clear on paper, and less clear in practice. Hold the corridor, demonstrate Voth presence, be prepared to repel human incursion. The briefing had included the tactical reconstruction of the Kairos engagement. Gren Vass had studied it carefully. He had noted the ramming, the debris field tactic, the 3 hours and 51 minutes. He had filed it under anomaly, single vessel, desperate action under extreme duress, not representative of human military doctrine. This was a reasonable conclusion. A single incident was not a pattern. He would revise that conclusion later. His force in the corridor consisted of 4 destroyers, 2 cruisers, and a command vessel. 6 weeks of sitting and waiting in the long dark of the Kepler corridor, supply runs, maintenance cycles, the particular boredom of military presence operations, which required you to be ready for something that was probably not going to happen while making it clear to anyone watching that you were ready. The humans came on a Tuesday. Gren Vass would remember that detail later. For no particular reason. It was a Tuesday, by the human calendar, which his ship's computer helpfully converted because it tracked all major species. Timekeeping systems, they dropped out of FTL at 7 different points simultaneously. Not one fleet, 7 groups. Each group appearing at a different position around the corridor's approach envelope, at distances ranging from 300 to 800 kilometers. Each group consisting of between 4 and 9 vessels. Gren Vass looked at the sensor display and felt something that his people called breath. A word that translated roughly as the cold moment of understanding that a situation is not what you assumed it was. He counted the contacts, 41 human vessels, against his 7. This was not unexpected in terms of numbers. The humans had been mobilizing. Intelligence had estimated they would commit significant force to retaking the corridor. Gren Vass had planned for numerical disadvantage. Voth warships were individually more capable than human vessels. Training was better. Weapons technology was comparable, perhaps slightly in the Voth favor. A ratio of 2 or even 3 human ships per Voth vessel was manageable. 41 to 7 was not the problem. The problem was the composition. He had expected human warships, military vessels, the ESS destroyers and cruisers that his intelligence files described in detail. What his sensors were showing him was more complicated. There were military vessels in the human force, yes. About a third of them. The rest were something else. Modified freighters with weapons platforms bolted to their cargo frames. A mining hauler with what looked like 3 torpedo launchers welded to its forward section. Something that had once been a passenger transport, and now had an entire flank covered in point defense emplacements. They were not uniform. They were not elegant. They looked, if Gren Vass was being honest, like they had been assembled in a hurry by people who were very determined and not particularly concerned with aesthetics. He opened a channel to his fleet. All ships. Formation Keth 7, engage at will. Prioritize the military vessels. The converted civilian craft are lower threat. This was the reasonable assessment. A converted freighter was not a warship. He revised that assessment 11 minutes later. The human military vessels came in first. Fast, direct, aggressive. They pushed straight at the Voth formation and drew fire. 2 of them took significant hits in the first exchange. 1 lost engine capacity. Both kept coming. While Grenvos's ships were focused on the military vessels, the converted civilian craft did something he had not anticipated. They didn't attack, not at first. They moved to positions, specific positions, spread out across the engagement space in a pattern that his tactical officer spent 40 seconds analyzing before she said, "Commander, they're establishing a perimeter." "A perimeter for what?" "For us." He looked at the display. She was right. The converted civilian vessels were not engaging aggressively. They were positioning themselves to cut off retreat vectors. Each group of them covered a different exit angle from the corridor. They were, with their improvised weapons and their bolted-on torpedo launchers, sealing the space. It was not elegant. The individual ships were not threatening. But collectively, as a net, they were going to be a problem. The 2 damaged human military vessels, the ones that had taken significant hits in the first exchange, did not fall back. One of them, trailing atmosphere from a hull breach, pivoted and came around for a second pass. The other one, which had lost most of its engine capacity, was being covered. 3 of the smaller human ships moved into position around it and provided fire suppression while the damaged vessel drifted. They were protecting it, not retreating with it, staying in the engagement and protecting it. Grenvos had 11 engagements of experience. In all 11, when a vessel was significantly damaged, it withdrew or was destroyed. It was not covered. It was not protected in place while the battle continued around it. He adjusted his orders. Target the cover ships around the damaged vessel. Remove the cover, then destroy the vessel. His ships redirected fire. The cover ships took hits. 2 of them took serious damage. They did not withdraw. 2 more moved in to replace the ones that were damaged, and the ones that were damaged moved to slightly less exposed positions and kept firing. They were rotating, sharing the damage load. When one got too hurt to maintain the position effectively, another took over, and the hurt one moved to secondary support. This was not in his briefing. This was not a standard human military tactic documented in any of the intelligence files he had been given. It had the feel of something improvised, a decision made on the fly by people who were working with what they had and had decided, collectively, without any apparent coordination he could observe, that they were not going to let that damaged ship die alone. 2 hours into the engagement, Grenvos had destroyed 4 human vessels and significantly damaged 9 more. He had lost 1 destroyer and had 2 cruisers with serious damage. By the numbers, he was winning. He did not feel like he was winning. The humans were not reacting the way a force that was losing reacted. There was no thinning of the engagement, no drawing back of the less capable ships, no signal traffic that suggested any part of the human force was considering withdrawal. The damaged ships kept fighting. The ships covering the damaged ships kept covering them. The perimeter vessels maintained their positions. He had destroyed 4 vessels. 41 minus 4 was 37. He still had 37 human ships in the engagement, and the 7 he had started with were now 5, with 2 of the 5 damaged. The math was changing. "Commander," his tactical officer's voice was careful. "The damaged cruiser, Vash Torin, is reporting that its port weapons array is offline and its FTL drive has taken damage. Can it fight?" "Yes, sir, with reduced capacity." "Then it fights." But even as he said it, he was looking at the display. Vash Torin was damaged, and 2 of the human military vessels were already adjusting their positions, angling toward it, not attacking yet, waiting. They had noticed. They were already repositioning to exploit the weakness before he had fully assessed it himself. He made a decision. All ships, fall back to secondary position, controlled withdrawal. The Voth formation began to move. Grenvos watched his ships pull back in good order, maintaining coherence, covering each other's withdrawal the way they had trained to. The humans followed, not chasing. He had expected chasing, an aggressive pursuit that would stretch his retreating ships and give him the opportunity to turn and engage on better terms. Chasing was what you did when the enemy withdrew. It was tactically simple and often effective. They didn't chase, they herded. The human force moved with his retreat, matching his withdrawal speed, maintaining pressure, but more importantly, moving to close the angles. The converted civilian ships at the perimeter were repositioning as he moved, staying ahead of him, cutting off exit vectors one at a time. He could still reach his secondary position. If he pushed speed. Vash Torin. Couldn't push speed. If he left Vash Torin. Behind, the humans would take it. If he stayed at the Vash Torin's speed, the human net would close around all of them before he reached his position. He had been herded here, smoothly, without a dramatic tactical masterstroke. Just patient, collective movement that had taken 41 ships and turned them into a shape that pointed directly at his problem. He turned to his communications officer. "Get me emergency FTL, sir." Vash Torin. "I know." He looked at the display. "Contact Vash Torin. Tell them to make for the nearest safe exit point independently. They have emergency FTL capability? Marginal, sir. They can get one jump. Then they take it now." Vash Torin jumped, gone. The rest of his fleet pushed speed and pulled back. The human net was not quite closed. There was a gap, a narrow one, covered by two of the converted civilian vessels. His cruiser, Wrath Khan, opened fire on both of them, chewed through them with concentrated fire, and the gap held long enough for the Voth formation to pass through it. They were out. His fleet reassembled at the secondary position, ragged and diminished. Gren Voss sat in the command chair and looked at the situation report. He had one destroyer and two cruisers. One of the cruisers was the Wrath Khan, which was damaged but functional. His command vessel was largely intact. Vash Torin was somewhere in emergency FTL, probably alive. He had started with 7 ships. He was leaving with at best 5, 2 of them damaged. The humans had lost 6 ships destroyed. 14 more were showing significant damage in his last sensor read. He had inflicted more destruction than he had suffered by raw count. He had lost the corridor, not because he ran out of ships, not because the humans had outgunned him, not because of any single decision that had gone wrong. He had lost the corridor because 41 ships, a third of them converted civilian craft, crewed by people who 3 months ago had been miners and freighter mechanics and cargo inspectors, had moved as a single patient thing, absorbed everything he threw at them, and turned the entire engagement space into a shape that had exactly one correct answer, which was leave. He filed his report before he slept. The report was accurate. He was not a commander who softened facts. He wrote the tactical summary in the clipped formal register of Voth military documentation. Then, at the end, he wrote one line that was not in the formal register. It was not standard to include such a line in a military report. He included it anyway. They do not retreat to regroup. They retreat to reload. He sent the report. Then he sat alone in his command chair for a while, in the quiet of a ship that was heading away from a corridor it no longer held. He thought about the mining hauler with the torpedo launchers welded to its front. He thought about the damaged human vessel that had been covered and protected for 2 hours by ships rotating in and out of danger positions. He thought about the way the perimeter had moved with him, ahead of him, patient and deliberate. He thought about the Kairos, which had rammed a destroyer and hidden in the wreckage. He had filed that under anomaly, single vessel, desperate action. It was not an anomaly. It was a sample. In the Merrick Confederacy's observation post on the edge of the neutral zone, 3 analysts who had been watching the battle on long-range sensors sat in front of their displays and said nothing for a long moment after it was over. Then the senior analyst, a Merak named Devon, pulled up General Sorvan's back-channel communication to the human diplomatic office and checked whether there had been a response yet. There had. It had arrived 4 hours ago. While the battle was ongoing, it was short. Human diplomatic communications tended to be short, he was learning. It said, "We received your message. We are currently occupied. We will respond when the corridor is clear. Office of Delegate Adeyemi." Devon read it twice. Then he forwarded it to Sorvan with a single note attached. The note said, "They answered us between battles." Sorvan read it in his office. He read the battle report alongside it. He looked at the numbers, the ratio, the converted civilian ships, the rotating cover positions, the herding pattern. He looked at the last line of Grenvoss's report. He thought about 41 ships, a third of them modified civilian craft, crewed by people with 3 months of training. He thought about what those ships would look like in 6 months, in a year. As the training deepened and the crews became soldiers in practice as well as name, and the shipyards kept running double shifts, and the miners kept signing contracts, he thought about attrition, about the threshold, about approaching zero. He picked up his communication terminal and began drafting his response to the human diplomatic office. It was not a short message. It was the longest thing he had written in years. He chose every word carefully. Outside, the stars were the same as they had always been, cold and distant and indifferent. The Kepler corridor was, in the language of galactic geography, a small and unremarkable stretch of space. It had just become, in a 6-hour battle that nobody outside a handful of intelligence services would know about for weeks, the most important stretch of space in the mapped galaxy. Not because of what had been won or lost, because of what it proved. The humans were not stopping, they were reloading. Concord Station was neutral ground. That was the theory anyway. In practice, neutral ground in the mapped sectors meant a place where everyone was uncomfortable equally, which was close enough to fairness that it had held for 200 years. The station was old, older than human spaceflight, built and maintained jointly by 7 species under a treaty that had required 11 years of negotiation, and was still argued about in academic circles. It sat at the intersection of 4 major transit lanes, which made it inconvenient to attack and expensive to avoid. It smelled of recycled air and 17 different species food, and the particular staleness of a place that was always occupied and never truly anyone's home. The meeting room that had been assigned for this particular gathering was on the station's 4th level, midway between the Marok diplomatic suite and the Voth guest quarters, which was either a coincidence of logistics or a deliberate piece of symbolic positioning, depending on how suspicious you were feeling. The room had a long table, chairs designed to accommodate 4 different body configurations, a wall display that was currently dark, a pitcher of water. Adeyemi arrived first. She arrived alone, no aide, no military escort, no second delegate to share the weight of the room. She came in with a tablet under her arm and a carry bag over one shoulder, and she looked to the station attendant who showed her in, like someone who had slept on a transport and not particularly well. She set her tablet on the table. She poured herself a glass of water. She sat down and waited. General Sorvan of the Marok Confederacy arrived 8 minutes later with 2 aides who took up positions against the wall and did not sit. Sorvan himself sat across the table from Adeyemi. He was tall, even-seated, gray-skinned, with dark, still eyes that had the quality of deep water. Not empty, but difficult to read the depth of. He said, "Delegate Adeyemi, thank you for coming," she said. "General Sorvan, thank you for the back channel. It was useful." They looked at each other across the table for a moment. 2 people who had been watching the same events from different angles and had ended up, through the logic of those events, in the same room. The Voth emissary arrived 14 minutes after that. His name was Veth Kas. He was not a military officer. He was a diplomat, which in Voth terms meant someone who had been selected for the ability to say difficult things in formal language without the conversation immediately becoming a battle. He was older than Grenveas, older than most of the officers in the briefings, with the particular stillness of someone who had been in difficult rooms before and had learned not to show what he was thinking until he chose to. He sat at the end of the table, not across from Adeyemi, not the end, which was either a deliberate positioning of neutrality or the only chair configuration that fit his body comfortably. Adeyemi didn't ask. There were other observers in the room. A Drenai coordinator who had requested permission to attend and been granted it. A Sul representative who communicated through a translation device and took up more space than the others. They sat along the wall. They were not at the table. This had been agreed in advance. Sorvan spoke first because that had also been agreed in advance, and because in the diplomatic grammar of the mapped sectors, the party who called the meeting spoke first. He said, "The Marok Confederacy has requested this meeting in the interest of regional stability. We have been observing the conflict between humanity and the Voth hegemony, and we believe the current trajectory is not in the interest of any party, including parties not directly involved." He paused. "We would like to facilitate a resolution," Veth Kas said. "The Voth hegemony is prepared to discuss terms." Adeyemi said nothing. She looked at Sorvan and waited. Sorvan looked back at her. "Delegate, what does humanity want?" The room was quiet. The question was simple, and it was the most important question in the room, and everyone knew it. Adeyemi put her tablet on the table but did not look at it. She had not needed to look at it since she walked in. "The 11 names back," she said. "Since we can't have that, 3 things. The Kepler corridor under SS jurisdiction, with free transit rights for all species guaranteed by Confederacy oversight. A permanent non-aggression accord between humanity and the Voth hegemony, with violation terms defined and enforced by a joint tribunal, and the Voth commander who ordered the ambush of the Kairos. to stand before that tribunal and answer for the 11 dead. She stopped. The room processed this. It was Sorvan who spoke first. His voice was careful and measured. Not territorial expansion, not reparations, compensation for your losses. No, not, he paused, choosing words. Not a statement of subordination, a treaty of surrender. No, Adeyemi said. We don't want the Voth to surrender. We want them to be accountable. Those are different things. Sorvan was quiet for a moment. She could see him working through it, taking it apart, and examining it the way a thorough mind examined things that were not quite what it expected. Vethkas spoke from the end of the table. His translation device rendered his voice flat and formal, but the words themselves were not. You are asking for jurisdiction over the corridor you already hold. You are asking for a legal framework that constrains future conflict. You are asking for one individual to be accountable. He paused. These are modest demands for a party in your current military position. Yes, Adeyemi said. Why? She looked at him steadily. Because we don't want territory. We don't want to run the outer sectors. We don't want an empire. We want to go where we're going without getting ambushed. We want 11 people's deaths to mean something in law as well as in memory. And we want it to be expensive enough, legally, politically on the record, that the next Voth commander who looks at a human supply ship and thinks about the math thinks twice. Silence. That's it, she said. That's all of it. If the Voth can give us those three things, we stop. We stand down. We go home. Vethkas turned and looked at the wall for a moment. It was a Voth gesture that the translation notes in Adeyemi's briefing had described as the equivalent of a long exhale. Processing, deciding. The Drene coordinator along the wall was very still. The Sul representative's translation device made a low hum. Vethkas said, the commander who ordered the ambush. Yes, a tribunal, not an execution, not imprisonment by human authority. A joint tribunal, Adeyemi said. Marak oversight, findings on the public record, consequences proportional to the findings. We're not asking for his head. We're asking for accountability. Another silence. The Kepler corridor, Vethkas said. ESS jurisdiction with guaranteed transit rights. Freely used by all species. Confederacy overseen. Nobody owns the corridor. Humanity administers the safety and transit protocols because our supply lines run through it, and that's a practical matter, not a political statement, Sorvan said quietly. That is a workable framework. Vethkas looked at him, then back at Adeyemi. I need to transmit this to High Command, he said. I know, she said. Take the time you need. She picked up her glass of water and leaned back in her chair, not performing ease, just waiting, the way she had been waiting since the Kairos came home. Vethkas transmitted. High Command deliberated for 4 hours. Adeyemi stayed in the meeting room. Sorvan's aides brought food at some point. She ate without much attention to what it was. Sorvan himself left briefly and returned. They talked, in the empty hours of waiting, about things that were not the negotiation, about transit lane administration, about the Sul's archival program, about nothing in particular. It was the kind of conversation that happens in rooms where people are waiting for something and have decided to be human about the wait. At one point, Sorvan said, Can I ask you something directly? Yes, your declaration, 3 sentences. No rhetorical preamble, no statement about the future of humanity or the cost of aggression. He paused. Was that deliberate? Yes. Why? Adeyemi thought about it for a moment. Because we weren't making a speech. We were answering a question. The Voth asked us whether we would accept their terms. We said no, everything else would have been extra. Sorvan looked at her. Most species, in your position, would have written a document. We had a document, she said. The sensor data from the Kairos. That was the document. The declaration was just our answer to theirs. He was quiet for a moment. You're not what we expected. I know, she said. We're not what we expected either sometimes. High Command's response came back in 4 hours and 20 minutes. Vethkas returned to the table. He sat down. He placed his own tablet in front of him. He said, The Voth hegemony accepts the corridor framework and the non-aggression accord under Confederacy oversight. A pause. The tribunal for Commander Vosteno, the officer who ordered the ambush, the hegemony accepts in principle, with the condition that the tribunal findings be binding on all parties, and that the process is administered by Confederacy judicial authority with Voth and human representation. Agreed, Adeyemi said. She had not needed to think about it. There is one additional condition from the hegemony. She waited. A joint statement acknowledging that the conflict is concluded and that no further military action will be taken by either party from the date of signing, no ongoing claims, a clean close. She thought about Osi, about the list of names, about whether a clean close was what those 11 names deserved, or whether it was the thing that made their deaths mean something, rather than just mark the start of something longer and worse. Agreed, she said, with the condition that the joint statement names the 11 dead specifically. Their names are in the document, not a reference to casualties, not a number, their names. Vethkas looked at her for a moment. Agreed, he said. The accord was signed 3 days later. The signing was not public. There would be a formal announcement, a public version of the document, a ceremony of some kind that the diplomatic offices would arrange in the following weeks. But the signing itself happened in the same unremarkable room on the 4th level of Concord Station, with the same people and the same pitcher of water and the wall display that was still dark. Adeyemi signed for humanity. Sorvan signed as Confederacy witness and guarantor. Vethkas signed for the Voth hegemony. The Drenai coordinator and the Sul representative signed as additional observers. The Drenai coordinator's signature was very small and very careful. The Sul representative's was a pressure wave rendered through the translation device into a mark that looked like a topographic contour line. Nobody made a speech. The documents were transmitted to the relevant authorities. The room was cleared. Ose was on the Kairos. When she heard, the ship was fully repaired. Both engine nacelles matched now. The forward section was rebuilt with new plating that was slightly lighter in color than the rest of the hull, which the crew had taken to calling the Scar, affectionately, the way you named things that had been through something with you. The 4 laser cannons were all operational, including the 4th one, which had been in diagnostic loop for 3 months before the ambush and had been fixed during the repair cycle along with everything else, almost as an afterthought. She was on the bridge, not doing anything specific, just sitting in the command chair, which she did sometimes when the ship was docked and quiet, because the chair had become the place she thought best. Her communications panel chimed, an official ESS channel. She opened it. The message was from Adeyemi's office, short, direct. The accord is signed. The corridor is ours. The tribunal is scheduled. Their names are in the document. A. Osi read it twice. She had a piece of paper in the pocket of her uniform. She had been carrying it since the engagement. She took it out and unfolded it. The paper was worn at the folds now. The handwriting was hers, put down in the medical bay of the Ardent. While Rhea stood beside her and waited. 11 names. She read them, all of them, slowly, the way she had been reading them since the day she wrote them down. Not as a ritual of grief exactly, though it was that, too, as a practice of memory, because memory was the only jurisdiction that mattered for the dead, and she had appointed herself responsible for maintaining it. She folded the paper and put it back in her pocket. Priya Shen appeared in the bridge doorway, the young nav operator, 22 years old, who had survived the engagement and had gone home on leave for 2 weeks after and come back and said nothing about either the going or the returning, and had simply sat back down at her station and been there. "Commander," she said, "is it over?" Osi looked at her. "The fighting is over." Shen nodded slowly. "Is that enough?" It was a real question, not rhetorical. Shen was 22 and had survived something, and had lost colleagues and was trying to understand what the shape of the thing was. Now that the acute part was done, Osi thought about it honestly. "It's what we can have," she said. "The corridor's ours. There's accountability on the record. Their names are in the official documents." She paused. "It's not everything. It's not them back, but it's not nothing." Shen looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way young people nod when they are accepting something that is true but not satisfying. "Okay," she said. She went back to her station. Osi sat in the command chair for a while longer. Through the forward viewport, the docking bay of the ESS facility was a grid of lights and activity. Ships coming and going, crew moving. The ordinary business of a place that did not know it was adjacent to the thing she was sitting with. She thought about the Voth commander who had ordered the ambush, who would stand before a tribunal, who would answer. She thought about 41 ships, a third of them converted civilian craft, taking a corridor back in 6 hours. She thought about what Adeyemi had said in the medical bay. They chose the answer. They had, and humanity had answered. And somewhere in the diplomatic records and intelligence archives and closed-door conversations of 20 species, the answer was being processed, filed, remembered, attached to the word that the Sewell archivist had surfaced, and that was now moving through every major intelligence network in the mapped sectors. Attrition, not a threat, not a boast, just a fact about what humans were and what they did when pushed. A fact that had been demonstrated once in a debris field by a supply ship, and demonstrated again in a 6-hour battle by miners and mechanics in converted freighters. and demonstrated a third time in a meeting room on Concord Station by a woman with a tablet and no military escort who had looked at the most powerful military authority in the sector and told them exactly what she wanted, and exactly nothing more. The galaxy had always known war. It had known grand fleet engagements and decisive strikes and the logic of overwhelming force. It had known species that fought for territory, and species that fought for resources, and species that fought because fighting was what the dominant power did to demonstrate that it was dominant. It had not known this particular stubborn, grieving, mathematical, absolute version of it. This refusal to stop that was not rage, not hot, not dramatic, not the explosion of a species pushed too far and finally snapping. Just the cold, steady, patient turning of something that had decided it was not done. The galaxy would not forget. The Draenei coordinator, back on Hub 7, updated his trade contracts and filed a note in his personal archive. Do not initiate against humans. Do not allow proxies to initiate against humans. The cost-benefit calculation does not close. The Sewell archivist updated the historical record with a new entry. The entry was longer than usual. At the bottom of it, the archivist added a note in the personal register that other archivists would read after the archivist was gone. The note said, "They named their dead in the peace accord. The treaty that ended the war began with the names of 11 people. This is the thing to understand about them. They do not fight for territory or ideology or dominance. They fight because someone died and the death has not yet been answered. As long as it is unanswered, they continue. The way to end a conflict with humans is not to defeat them. It is to give them an answer they can live with. We should be careful never to ask them a question we are not prepared to answer for." And in the ESS facility above Earth, on a repaired ship with a pale scar on her forward hull, Commander Yara Ose sat in her command chair as the docking bay lights moved and shifted around her, and kept the paper with 11 names in her pocket, where it had always been, where it would stay.